get started. We still got some more council people to come in, but we do have a quorum now. So we're ready to roll. We do have, in the records will show that we started at 6:39, and we do have a quorum present with our city council tonight. I do want to welcome you. I appreciate you being here. It looks like by the time the rest of the people get through coming in that we're going to have a full house. We may have to break out some more chairs, and that's good. Appreciate your taking the time to be here. The first thing that we're going to do tonight is receive the presentation on our city budget. We style this as City Budget 101, and we want to go through the process that we go through to develop a city budget. It's an ongoing process all year long. It starts in the fall when the council has a retreat and sets their goals or their pillars for the coming year, and then staff takes that and starts breaking it down for their individual departments, and we work on it all through the spring. As you can imagine, the amount of staff requests come in just a bit higher than the budget will allow. We cannot finalize our budget until the end of July, and that's when we get certification on our tax roll, because we have to have a balanced budget. So at this time, I'll call our city manager, Mr. Kevin Hugman, up to get the ball rolling. Yeah, I can. We've got 5 of our council people here. We've got Councilman Patrick LeBlanc, Mayor Pro Tem Dennis Schwartz, Councilwoman Leslie Thompson, and Councilman Dr. Ron Dotson are here today. So we appreciate them being here. Kevin?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. As the Mayor said, we are getting ready to really get into the grind or the nitty-gritty of the budget preparation each year. But as the Mayor said, it is almost really like an ongoing process throughout the year. It seems like no sooner than the council passes a budget, we start thinking about the next year's budget. And the council has their annual retreat, and they look at their long-range vision. They look at where the city is today, and what do they need to do, what do we need to do to get to that long-range vision. And so they set those goals for us as staff. We then take that, and our department heads take those goals, and we create objectives, and we start drafting our work plans, the things that we need to accomplish in the next year. And then that helps us as we start formulating the budget to look at what are our resources, what are our needs, and trying to pull all of those things together. So part of that certainly is the citizen input, and that's why y'all are here tonight, and I appreciate everyone being here. We've got a great crowd. This is the 3rd year that we've done this town hall. I think it's gone well. We've gotten a lot of good feedback from citizens on this, and so we're going to have a couple of exercises for y'all tonight, so you will be able to get up and move around and everything too. That way you'll stay awake as we start talking about numbers and finance and stuff. The only people who really get excited about that is our finance director, Richard Summerlin. The rest of us, our eyes start glazing over after a while. But as the mayor said too, what we wanted to do is to kind of do a really quick and dirty budget 101 for you to kind of explain where our funds come from and where do they go for the general fund. So when we talk about the general fund, that is our most important fund in the city, but we have several other funds. But the general fund is what pretty much pays for most of the operations and maintenance of the city, the services that are provided to the citizens, whether it's police, fire, parks and rec, public works, streets, and so forth. We also have some other funds, including the water and wastewater fund, or the utility fund. The utility fund is called an enterprise fund. What it does is the revenues that we take in from water and wastewater and trash collection pays for those services. And it can only be used for those services. So Within that, we provide water and wastewater maintenance and operations. We have a number of personnel that are funded out of that. Our capital projects, when it comes to replacing water and wastewater lines, comes out of that fund. And we're not going to talk about that one tonight. We're going to talk about the general fund because that is also the one that most people think of when they're paying their tax bill. We have in the city a number of other funds as well that are restricted to the uses of those funds, and they generally may come from different revenue sources. For example, the Economic Development Corporation that takes in half-cent sales tax, the Hotel Occupancy Tax Fund that takes in hotel occupancy taxes, and some other funds like that, that those revenues that come in are restricted in how they're used. But all of that is also part of the overall city budget. But tonight, as I said, we're going to concentrate on the general fund, kind of talk to you about the basics of that, and then we're going to give you all an opportunity to help us start formulating the budget. So our Okay, yes ma'am. So I will, we have a number of staff people here tonight. Our administrative assistant, Kristen Downs, assistant city manager, Paul Frederickson, our finance director, Richard Summerlin, public works director, Greg Ramey, economic development director, Jessica James, our parks and recreation director, Bart Stevenson, and our police chief, Robert Brown. And then farther in the back corner over there, kind of hiding out, is our assistant fire chief, Greg Chase, and assistant Fire Chief Mike Ryan. Back here, Fire Chief Sam Rohde, our Library Director Julio Velasquez, our Human Resources Director Todd Siegel, and then our IT Manager Tracy Beekman, and our IT people Jesse and Aaron. And also in the back is our Public Information Officer Cody Boehner. Did I get everybody? Okay. Are there any staff that I didn't call? Okay, or they're hiding. Okay, so as we go into the budget and talking about, again, the general funds, our general fund budget on our revenue side is $33.3 million. And as you can see, there's a number of different sources in the general fund. Predominantly, property tax makes up the bulk of that, or the largest portion of it, if you will, and as you can see, it's not even half, though, of the general fund revenues that we take in. So it's about 43% on property taxes. That comes from the valuation on your homes, on your residences. It's also the valuation on commercial property, and then in some commercial property, it's also the business inventory or business property taxes also. The second largest portion of our revenue is sales tax. As you know, most cities levy 8.25% sales tax. 6.25% of that goes to the state, 2% comes to the city, and a portion of that goes to Economic Development Corporation, and a portion of that goes to the city general fund as a revenue. Transfers are transfers in from other funds. I mentioned to you the other funds like the water, the utility fund, the hotel occupancy tax fund, and the EDC. We transfer some money from those funds into the general fund to pay for the administrative overhead that supports those funds, but those personnel are paid for out of the general fund. So finance, human resources, those kinds of things, different personnel costs that are paid for out of those funds, and it comes into the general fund to reimburse that overhead. Franchise receipts are revenues that we get from utility companies, and that is basically a lease payment from the utility companies for the use of the public right-of-ways. So the public right-of-ways are public land. So they're being used by private entities, by those utilities, and so they pay a utility fee or franchise fee. In most cases, that is a percentage of their gross revenue. In some cases, like with phones, it's based on the number of lines. So over the years, what we have seen, though, is a reduction in our franchise receipts. And there's a couple of different causes for that. We've seen a reduction in our cable franchise fees because as a lot of people have moved off of cable and onto satellite, those receipts, those gross receipts for cable companies have been going down, so we have seen less revenue coming from that. Phones as well, as a lot of people are giving up their landlines, we're seeing less revenue coming in that are based on the number of landlines, and we don't get revenue based on cell phones. So the franchise receipts we're seeing historically over the past number of years, we've been seeing a steady decline in those revenues. Permits and fees are our building permits and fees that we charge for services like emergency medical services, building permits, inspection fees. Those are the revenues that we collect for that. The next one is fines. Fines are predominantly municipal court fines. There's also library fines and then some other miscellaneous types of fines like as well. And then other is different types of revenue that might come in, such as like lease payments, cell phone companies that have cell phone antennas on our water towers or antennas on our property pay a lease payment. We're also receiving lease payments for the building from Eon. And then recreation fees are recreation user fees. So when you sign up for different recreation classes and pay a fee, those fees are coming into the general fund as well. And then the street maintenance fee was a fee that we had anticipated and had discussed with the council. We plugged that in for a partial year. Since the budget was developed, the council has decided not to implement that. So that is really not coming in. That is not a revenue. It doesn't affect the budget because we had also transferred out the same amount of money for next year. So it really is a net wash on the budget. But we have not done anything with the street maintenance fee. So we talked about the property taxes, and that's something that's always on people's minds is how much they pay in taxes. And when you get your tax bill, a lot of times people don't really look at the breakdown on that tax bill and who they're paying the taxes to. They just know they're writing a big check. But as you can see on the tax rate, a quarter of it is for the city of Duncanville. So a quarter of your tax bill is what you're paying for the city services that you're receiving. Most of your tax bill, a little over half, is going to the school district, and then you're also paying some to Parkland Hospital, some to the county, and some to the community college district. So as we talked about property values also, and most people know that in recent years property values have been going up. And in Duncanville they have been going up as well, but historically, as you can see, they took a nosedive for a while, and I think most people will remember back in 2008, 9, 10, when the recession started, property values started dropping. And so Duncanville was no exception to that. We saw average home values dropping in price or in valuation. And so when you keep the tax rate at one level, if your valuation is going down, then your revenues are going down. But as you can see over the years, the values now have started coming back up in 2013. And really this year, 2017 values are the first year that they have exceeded where they were back in 2008. So the average home value in Duncanville is valued at about $121,000, and we're going to kind of refer to that average value here in just a little bit as well. So on the tax burden, or on the taxable value, if you will, one of the things that we look at is that overall tax value. When we get those numbers from the Central Appraisal District, they're giving us a valuation of all of the property, real property in Duncanville, whether it's residential or commercial or business personal property. Obviously, the bigger value you have, the bigger tax base you have, the more revenue you can make, assuming that the rate is the same. So when we compare to our other cities around us, you can see that our residential taxable value per capita is lower than DeSoto, Cedar Hill, and Dallas, which means that we don't have the same kind of property tax base that those cities have. But how does that equate then in tax burden or in the tax bill to citizens? If you assume that most cities are essentially providing equal services for their core services, police, fire, parks and recreation, streets, maintenance, and so forth, you can see that the tax burden, the tax bill for Duncanville residents is still lower than some of our surrounding cities, such as Dallas, DeSoto, and Cedar Hill. Now, one of the things that that we strive for is economic development. And the reason for economic development is to grow the commercial tax base. In the last 10 years, we have seen a little bit of a shift from the residential side of valuation to commercial. So in other words, the commercial properties have picked up a little bit of the percentage of the overall tax burden, and the residential side has dropped a little bit. And that's what we want. We want to shift more of that tax burden to the commercial side. We want to see more commercial valuation, greater valuation on the commercial side to bring in the tax dollars to relieve that burden on the residential. In cities that are heavily residential and don't have very much commercial, they can have a heavy tax burden on the residential properties. We have a pretty good mix, but we need to grow that commercial base, and that's one of the reasons why economic development is so important to us, why we need to create that atmosphere in the city and take care of our infrastructure to entice that development by private entities. So when we talk about the tax rate again, because that is one of the things that the council can control, is what does a penny on the tax rate do? Well, to the overall city, a penny on the tax rate, and again, this is using now the average value of a $121,000 home, but a penny equates to $207,000 in revenue. So you can see what $207,000 in revenue for the city means in terms of providing the services that we provide. Almost 4 police officers, almost 4 firefighter paramedics, patrol vehicles, paving concrete streets or sidewalks. To the average average homeowner of that $121,000, if we reduce the property tax by a penny, you would see a $12 savings in a year. That's an annual savings of $12. Now, if your home value is twice that, $121,000, then you're going to see a $24 annual savings. So a penny on the tax rate to the average homeowner from the city side of it, again, remembering that only a fourth of your tax bill is the city, has a minimal impact, if you will, over the year, but to the city it can mean a significant difference. So on the expenditure side, where do the funds go? So we have a $33 million expenditures, and so you can see from the breakdown, police is about a quarter of our budget. Fire is 19%, public works is about 21%. Typically, police and fire are going to be the 2 top categories because of the size of those departments, the equipment they have, and the compensation for those positions. Our public works has gone up really over the last year because we've put a lot more money into the street maintenance side. And so that is pushing those numbers up on public works, but it's because of we've added $1.8 million this current year into the street maintenance side to do mill and overlays, crack sealing, and those kinds of things on our roads. If you go back to the slide on the revenues, if you think back on that and how much property tax was, the percentage of property tax on total revenues was about 46-48%, and that's about the same percentage as police and fire. So on one hand, you can kind of think of your property taxes are paying for police and fire. All the other services that you're receiving are coming from other revenue sources like sales tax, fines, permit fees, and so forth. So we have Parks and Rec, general government, which includes the library, finance, and economic development. So by category, again, over half of our expenditures go to salaries and benefits. And that makes sense because we're a service organization. So we can't provide the services we do to the citizens without people, without personnel. And so we have to pay the personnel, the people, to do those services. The services category there is what we pay for water, wastewater, electricity, gas, legal fees, professional fees, things like that. So we pay for all of the electricity for the street lights in the city. We pay all of the water that we use as a city. So we pay just like everyone else does. And that's what that services category is. Innovation Fund, that is a fund that we take excess fund balance. So we have a certain amount of funds that are above what we need for daily operations, and we try to keep about, by policy, we keep a minimum of 60 days fund balance. That's a reserve fund, a rainy day fund. In case we have a catastrophe, tornado, flooding, something major that hits the city that we have not budgeted for, we have extra funds available. We try to keep about 75 days fund balance. When we finish the year and we have more revenue than we expected, or our expenditures are less than what we expected, then that money goes into the fund reserve. And whatever's over 75-day fund reserve, we try to peel that off and use that for one-time type of projects. We don't want to use that for ongoing expenses because it's not an ongoing revenue source. So it's only for a one-time, and that's what we call the Innovation Fund, and we have funded some different things with that, some park improvements over the last couple of years, some playgrounds, shade structures at the Harrington Park, some things like that. Safety and security, we've added security cameras to several of the parks, to some of our facilities. Those have come out of the Innovation Fund. Supplies are all of the things that we use in providing the services. So all of the expendable types of things that we use, and that's everything from paper to asphalt, concrete, barricades, you name it. All of those things that we use up in the course of our work are considered supplies. Capital is capital projects, capital assets. We'll talk a little bit about that more later on tonight in the second part of tonight's town hall meeting. But capital assets are major assets that have a useful life of more than 1 year. And then we have some for economic incentives that the general fund is paying a couple of economic development incentive grants, and then a little bit for debt service, and then a little bit for transfers out. So this is kind of just an overview of the services that are provided out of the general fund. And so as we go into the budget, when we balance the budget, as the mayor said. Our ongoing operations and maintenance costs are held below our ongoing revenues. And we're required to do that, and we maintain that balanced budget. So as we go into the budget planning process, as the mayor mentioned, a lot of times the requests are more than what we have revenues. And so we have to look at where do we make cuts, where can we be more efficient. And every budget process we do, we're always looking at how we can save money, how we can provide services at less, or what we can cut, or what we don't need to do. At the same time, we have to balance the request or the demand for more services or increased maintenance levels or whatever it might be. So in balancing the budget, there are different ways to do it, and it's you either reduce the expenditure side or you increase the revenue side. We don't want to have to try to increase the property tax rate, and we have held it steady for 5 years, and that is always our goal in the council, to hold it steady or reduce it. But as we get into the budget, those are the things we have to consider. So this is the part now. Before I get to this, I'll see if there's any questions about budget, and then we'll get to your part of the exercise. Yes, sir. Sorry, that's you, Grady. So the question was the demise of Dallas County schools. It does not affect us directly because they provide services to the school district. Right. So it has impacted Duncanville School District on the standpoint of their school resource officers, because that was provided by Dallas County Schools. They have their own bus system, so that didn't impact them.
My second question is, are we ever going to get a fair break from the surrounding counties on the amount that we have to subsidize Parkland Hospital?
That's above my pay grade. I don't know.
That requires an act of the legislature.
All right, well, if there aren't any other questions, yes, sir.
Is there anybody in the city that, the gas business has been going on, the gas pipes and everything, breaking and so forth? Is there anybody in the city that kind of looks after that within the city?
Well, we don't really have any gas wells, so the only, actually, I'm sorry. The Atmos gas lines. You're talking about. Actually, we've looked at that. Our Public Works Director has gotten some maps, the best we can, to kind of look at the age of the lines that we have in the city, and we are in communication with them, and certainly, it is a concern. As far as we know, we've not had any major issues. We still don't really know all the answers as to what happened with the area there in Dallas, but it is certainly of concern to us. Now, Atmos has been replacing lines in different parts of the city for probably about the last year and a half, I think. So they are replacing lines. I can't say whether it's an adequate replacement amount of replacement that they're doing, but they are working at that. Okay. Yes, sir.
How does the revenue for 2008 fiscal year compare to last year in general?
I'm sorry, the revenue for what?
The revenue listed here, how does it compare to last year?
Oh, the revenue side? So the revenue for 2018 was higher than 2017. On the property tax side, we saw an increase of about $800,000 in property valuations from actually 2016 valuations to 2017 valuations. And then we saw an increase in sales tax of about $600,000 from 2016 to 2017. So and then we also saw some decreases on our permits, and our fines dropped about $200,000, and then some other categories dropped a little bit, and some categories went up a little bit. But again, with property tax and sales tax being the two largest, that was an increase of $1.5 million over the previous year. Our sales tax right now is still continuing to grow, which is a good thing. We're about 5% above where we were last year. When we budget for sales tax, though, we're very conservative, because sales tax can change and fluctuate quite a bit. We get monthly sales tax checks from the state, and so far this year, we've been increasing over last year each month, but it is not at all unusual to get some months that are less than last year's, same period last year. So, right now the economy's going well, but, things can change. And so we try to be very conservative on the sales tax side of budgeting the revenue, because it is hard to predict. Yes, sir.
So when you transfer money into the general fund for expenses, I just want to be sure I'm clear, that's a one-to-one kind of transfer. So in other words, if there's two people supporting water, you're just transferring that money to the general fund to cover them. How do those transfers? How do you decide how much you transfer?
Okay, so on the utility side, on the utility fund, when we do a rate study every few years, that is part of that rate study, is to look at what is an appropriate percentage of the revenues to transfer over for the overhead services that are provided. And I think the last time it was done, the council went with a lower percentage than what was recommended. Slightly lower. Yeah. So it was actually less than what was recommended by that rate study.
We felt that the health of the general fund at that time, based on what we were seeing with sales tax, it was unwarranted to transfer more than what we felt was necessary. So it was basically. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, we were coming off of a period where we had insufficient fund balance in our utility fund, so we were trying to help build that fund balance back and give the utility fund, water, sewer, as much help as we could as well.
Okay. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
You say that the surplus from the other funds goes into the innovation fund?
No, just the general fund.
So surpluses in the general fund go into the innovation fund?
So, right. If it's over 75-day fund balance, then that is one of the things that we take from and put into the innovation fund.
And how are those decisions made as to how that money is spent out of the innovation fund?
We provide that when we have our budget workshop with the council. We discuss with them the potential projects, and then we bring those projects back as part of the budget process by specific project and cost. And then the innovation fund is approved with specific projects and budgets for each project.
So with the increase in the property values last year, there should have been quite a bit of overage or overfunding in the general fund unless the budget was amended to make use of that. And then you're expecting another increase in property values this year. So how are you going to budget this year based on what the expenses were last year? How much fund over balance went into the innovation fund looking for the future?
Well, right now we don't know what that will look like, what the general fund, the fund balance will look like. But yes, you're right, revenues did go up, but so did expenses. And so every year as we look at our budget, we see expenses going up on certain areas. Medical insurance has gone up. Cost of supplies goes up. Each year we have tried over the last few years to budget for pay raises for employees to remain competitive. So as those expenses go up, that uses up some of those new revenues as well. So right now then what I would like to do is get to the exercise. And so all of you have on your tables little sticky pads. And what we would like to do is we've got some easel pads up here. We're going to label these easel pads. And one of them will be more, one will be less, one will be stay the same. And what we're asking you to do is write down what you would like to see the city spend less on, spend more on, or keep the same. I would ask that you keep one idea per sticky note, and that way we can kind of group them together. And staff will we'll keep all those sticky notes and we'll write down that common thing on the board. So it's 7:15, so we'd like to be back sitting down by 7:25, 10 minutes if y'all would. Okay, we're ready to go to the second part of this exercise. And so up on the boards, every staff has kind of consolidated all the sticky notes into the major subjects. And so what we're going to do is give you each, if y'all would come up, and we'll give you a little thing of sticky dots. There's 6 sticky dots. Put that on what you think is the most important thing that you see, the 6 most important things you see, 1 dot on each idea on any one of the boards that you think is a priority. So if you think that it's of most priority to you to, what's that top say? What does that say on the top? Oh, spend less on consultants, then put a dot on it. If you think that it's important to spend more on library, put a dot on it. Or spend the same on whatever it is, put a dot on it. So 6 things, you have 6 dots, put 1 dot on each of the 6 things that you think are the most important in any of those categories. Okay. They're up here. So Kristen's got some, Timothy has some, and Paul has some.
If I can have your attention, please. We're over scheduled by quite a bit, so if I can get you to take your seat, we've got one more part that we want you to participate in tonight. So if I can get you to take a seat, I'm going to turn it over to the city manager. And at this time, we want to talk a little bit about, we've got a bond committee appointed, and we want your views on that. So at this time, city manager.
Thank you, Mayor. So tonight we also wanted to, as part of our town hall meeting, also ask you for input on potential bond projects. So right now, one of the things that the council has been looking at is the possibility of a bond election in November to issue debt for major capital projects. They've appointed a citizen bond advisory committee to study that and to look at that and to recommend to the council, one, whether to even call a bond election, and if so, what projects they recommend. A number of the people that are on that committee are here tonight, and I would like for them to stand up and be recognized. So if you're on the Citizen Bond Advisory Committee, please stand up. Thank you. So we have Dave Galbraith, Pat Weaver, Gail Sliger, Grady Smithy, Mike Grace. And they are working very hard with a lot of meetings here over the next couple of months. So first of all, to kind of get started on this, I want to talk about what is a capital asset. And I mentioned to you earlier when we were talking about general fund about capital assets that are generally those things that last, that have a useful life of more than a year. When you're talking about bond projects, you're typically talking about much longer lifespan of that. And so if you're issuing a debt for 15 or 20 years, you want that asset to last that long. So a capital project is a major project that is going to have a long, useful life. It usually takes some time to implement it because it may be a very complex type of project. There may be a lot of design work involved in it, and then the construction period may be a lengthy period of time as well. So usually it's something that lasts over more than one fiscal year. So why would you issue bonds to pay for projects? Typically, to be able to do a larger project, again, if you're issuing debt, it's like buying a house. Most people are not able to save up money to pay cash for a house so they get a loan. Or even automobiles, so those larger types of projects. Secondly, it can help minimize the impact on the property tax rate so you don't have these large fluctuations year to year if you decide to do some large projects and then have to pay for them and have to change your tax rate. Another benefit of issuing debt for large projects is that generally, because they are lengthy, that you're paying that debt service over a period of time, future users of that asset are helping to pay for it. So the burden is not entirely on the current citizens, but also then on those who are using it 10, 15 years from now. Municipal bonds are tax exempt, so generally we get a lower interest rate on those bonds. The city of Duncanville has a good bond rating through Standard & Poor's. And then also it allows the city to use that portion of the property tax rate that goes to debt service. So within that tax rate, the property tax rate, the bulk of that goes to operations and maintenance, and then a portion of that tax that you pay in property taxes goes to debt service, or what's called the interest and sinking fund. Right now, the city of Duncanville has very little debt within the current property tax rate. Without changing the tax rate at all, the city could issue approximately $18 million in bonds for a 20-year bond. So that is one of the reasons why the council is looking at that as a possibility right now. So the bond committee, when they appointed a citizen committee, there's 19 people on the citizen bond advisory committee, and their purpose was to look at the community needs and the future improvements of the city and make recommendations to the council. And the charge to the committee, the questions that the committee needs to answer is first and foremost, should the city call for a bond election? So that will be one of their charges, one of their recommendations to the council, whether to even do that or not. If they do, then how much should the city look at? What projects should be looked at? And they're going to look at the comprehensive plan, the recommendations from the comprehensive plan, recommendations from the Parks Master Plan, and then any other projects that are out there, and evaluate those and then prioritize those. As you can imagine, there are more needs and wants for projects than what would be available in financing. So the committee has a lot of work to do over the next month and a half. They started here about 3-4 weeks ago, and the intent is to be able to make their recommendations to the council by the first part of June. So as part of that, they wanted to get citizen input. And so what we talked about was that we had the town hall meeting tonight on the budget. We decided to try to wrap this in with a capital projects input. And so we're going to do a similar type of exercise with you to be able to provide input to the Citizen Advisory Committee. So kind of some examples to kind of get you thinking about what kinds of projects we're talking about. For example, in parks, one of the projects that the council has been discussing for a couple of years is the idea of replacing Kidsville. It's gotten old, it has some issues, it does not meet all of the current safety regulations, but that's expensive to replace that. Another idea that has come from the Parks Master Plan is the idea of a splash pad to provide water features, also concession restroom buildings in some of the parks, or park pavilions in some of the parks as well. So these are typical types of parks capital projects. Public Works capital projects can be reconstruction of streets or reconstruction of alleys or sidewalks, things again that are long life major projects. So street maintenance is not included. So when we're doing mill and overlay, crack sealing and things like that, that comes out of our maintenance fund, and that is just extending the life of the street. But when a street gets to the point where it has totally failed, we have to go in and totally reconstruct it, which means taking it all the way down to the base, rebuilding that street, gives it another 20, 30, 40-year useful life with proper maintenance, but that's expensive to rebuild those streets. So some of the different projects, some streets, we have a number of different streets that qualify or that are in need of reconstruction. Some drainage projects as well that Public Works has identified as potential bond projects. And then city gateways is another thing that has been discussed as part of the branding effort for the city in providing major gateway features on Highway 67 and I-20 for the entryways into the city. Other examples of Public Works capital projects can be the extension of Main Street. So everyone's familiar with Phase 1 of Main Street around Ben Franklin, an area that has been landscaped and has the wide sidewalks. North of there has not been done. That has been part of the plan, is to take Phase 2. And so that is an idea as well that is being discussed with the Bond Advisory Committee. And then facilities is another area that we typically look at for potential bond projects, and some examples that are being discussed currently is the possibility of replacing the Central Fire Station, which is the one on Camp Wisdom. It's an old station. We cannot put the Quint in that station. It will not fit. There's a lot of other issues with that building just because it's old. So we're looking at whether it needs to be replaced or whether it can be renovated and brought up to modern standards. But those are some of the ideas. Some other types of facilities that have been discussed is the idea of a conference center / incubator space for Duncanville. So these are, again, just examples of some of the things that the committee is looking at. But what we wanted you to do now is, again, take those yellow sticky pads and write down any ideas that you have for capital projects that you think the city should consider doing. And in any of these categories, parks and trails, public works infrastructure or facilities. And then if you would, put them up here on the board, and we'll do the same kind of exercise as we did earlier. Are there any questions for me before we go? Yes, sir.
Knowing that the bond is a long-term debt, 15, 20 years, what type of risk assessment is done from the financial side, your responsibility side, to say that for 20 years the city's going to have enough money to service that debt for 18 million or whatever the number is going to be? And they sit down on the financial side and say, 20 years from now, we're not going to be in the hole by doing some kind of debt service.
Typically, the bond rating agency takes a look at that. Each year, we file quite a bit of financial information. There's a thing called a bond disclosure that's required by the SEC annually that we do. And so they're continually monitoring the financial health of the city. And our financial advisors have told us that based on the future outlook that there's not any problem or any issue with the mentioned amount, which was the up to 18 million over a 20-year life, that there's not any concern from the financial advisors or from the bond rating agencies for the city for the future for that. So we're pretty solid.
So the long-term risk is that the risk is substantial. I would sell it. The risk is very, very low that we're not going to be able to service the debt in years 18, 19, or 20.
Correct.
Right, as Richard said, we've looked at currently where we're at, and with the existing tax rate, that it can support that. But that will be also one of the discussion points with the Citizen Bond Advisory Committee, is to look at, do they want to go to that full amount or less, or what do they want to recommend to the council? They received a presentation from our financial advisors in their first meeting to talk about the health of the financial health of the city. Yes, sir. So water and wastewater capital projects are funded under the utility fund, and that's part of our analysis each year with the utility fund, is looking at, do we have adequate revenues to support the 5-year capital improvements plan in water and wastewater. So we feel that we're fairly well funded on water and wastewater projects and what we see in the next 5 years for needs there. But you're right on infrastructure for roads. We don't have a dedicated source of funds for capital improvements on roads, and that's why the committee is looking at those as possibilities or potential projects. I think the last time the city issued debt was 1997, 98, and I think there were some park projects, Waterview Park, that was included in that. So there were some other projects as well. I think probably what you're referring to is most of the smaller projects that have been done in that interim that were not part of the bond have been done through things like additional fund balance reserves, where we had extra money we were able to put to some of those smaller projects, which is kind of what we've been doing over the last few years. We've replaced some playgrounds and things like that, but we don't have the funds to do some of the bigger types of like park improvements or other types of things like Kidsville. Correct. Right. We can do that through bonds, and we still do have some outstanding water and wastewater debt. Yes, sir.
28 years ago, we passed the bond issue in 1990. They got a new fire station built down here. As the old fire station that was up here on, the wing was falling down on our fireman's head. We built that new fire station, the new fire station, 28 years ago. We're more than over
So again, the committee will be looking at all of those different things over the next month and a half and make their recommendations. Ultimately, it's the council that's going to decide how to move forward. Yes, sir, in the back. On the ones that we have, the examples, we do have projected costs, and I don't remember them off the top of my head, but we've provided that information. We have not gotten to all of the different subjects with the bond committee. We've talked with them about potential park projects and potential public works projects. So we're still working on those with them, but all of that is being provided to them. So tonight, what we're looking for is your input and what ideas you have for capital projects. And so some of the ideas you may have may already be on the list that they're looking at, but there also may be some new ideas that no one had thought about. And that's, also if we get new ideas, then this gives us some time to research them, to determine what the cost might be, and present those to the bond committee for their consideration. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and it's 8 o'clock already. Yes, ma'am? Well, I think that's for the bond committee to look at, and if that's something you want to mention to them, but I think as they go through, they'll look at that and decide whether the projects are worthy to do or not, or whether they want to do that. So, I mean, if you want to, that's up to you. Write that on a note, but the committee has that charge. That's their responsibility to give that information or that recommendation to the council. So we're going to go ahead and let's get started since it's 8 o'clock, so we'll take 10, 15 minutes if you would, and again, write your ideas down and put them up here, and then we'll come back and do the DOT project again. All right. If everybody's ready for the next step, just like the last time, we have sticky dots. So you've got 6 dots. Put 1 dot on the 6 most important things that you think should be considered. Thank you.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, if you will go ahead and wrap it up, I'll give you 3 or 4 more minutes, and then we're going to take the boards down. So if you'll go ahead and wrap it up. I want to thank you for being here tonight. I think this has been a very valuable meeting, and I hope that you understand a little bit more about the process we go through with the city budget. It's not easy. It takes a long time, and when it gets into the May area, then the budget is starting to be finalized. We can't finalize it until after the end of July, because that's when we get the certified roll from the county on what our tax revenue will be. So we at that time, then we'll go into a process where we have to have council meetings. We have to have a budget voted in, because the second meeting in September, we have to have that budget submitted. So we have to have either 1 or 2 public hearings on it prior to submitting that for the final approval. A couple of things I want to tell you about tonight. It's going to be a public input meeting on Monday, next Monday, the 23rd. That's Monday week, the 23rd. No, that's this coming Monday. Yeah, that's this coming Monday. Monday week, okay. At 6:30 over right here in the center. And it will be, the city is hosting a community meeting to receive community input on the replacement of Kidsville and adding a splash pad at Armstrong Park. If citizens cannot attend the meeting, input can be mailed to Bart Stevenson, Director of Parks and Rec, and then we've got a email for him. But we don't have the money to do these, but we're doing the study now to determine the exact cost and what the impact will look upon the city. Kidsville has served a great purpose. It's, 28 years old. It's been patched on, and it will not even meet a lot of the safety standards that are required now. So it's time that be replaced, whether we do it with a bond issue, whether we do it some other way, that is yet to be determined. So, Ken?
There's been discussion, I mean, a lot of them are involved in Kidsville, and citizens got involved in raising money, constructed it. We had a guy coming in that helped develop it and all this kind of thing and all. And it was really a community deal, and I just felt like everybody felt real good about it because the community, the citizens got involved and everybody got energized and all that kind of, which I think is great.
Yes.
Any discussion about us doing that type of thing yet?
It's still a little bit premature, but the type of wooden structure that is, you just really don't do those anymore. They've got the new powder-coated metal, things like that they use more often now, and they're a heck of a lot less expensive than that wooden structure. That wooden structure, I can't tell you, but the one figure I saw was about $3 million to replace that. And that's just unbelievable. But yes, when we did a project over by where our lake is, over backside of the park, we did have citizens who came in and helped direct that. They had supervisors from the company that were there to give guidance, but there'll be a lot of consideration for things like that, but not that far along right now. They're just in the exploratory stages, and until we get some money to do it, we can't do it, but at least we will. If we do get money, then we'll be a little bit further down the road in the planning and ordering what we want. Yes?
Aren't there some foundations that we could apply for grants for Kidsville type?
There are. In fact, the one that we did over that lake area over there, that was a gift that we applied for. But there is. Okay, you heard that. They're available, and that's another thing we'll be checking, but this will be a meeting to just get some citizen input about what we want to do with this over here. So it'll be on the 23rd. It'll be here in this building. It'll be at 6:30. And the results of this tonight, as soon as they can get it all tabulated and figured out, it will be posted on the website, so you can go on the website and see the results of our meeting tonight. Are there any other questions anybody has before we close it? Again, we appreciate you being here. I think these type meetings are important because it'll give you the opportunity to get a little exposure on how we do things here in the city and have a chance to give some citizen input in it. So thank you again for being here tonight, and we stand adjourned.